Throughout the making of our final product and our form opening, we have made a lot of improvements when it comes to the softwares that we know how to use and just kind of our ability to use those and take advantage of the softwares that were available to us. We did try and use as many kind of different softwares as we could, such as, you know, Final Cut Pro 7, even Final Cut Pro 10, a couple of Adobe softwares. So there are a lot of kind of things that we tried to learn and improve on. For the main kind of editing of our final product, we used Final Cut Pro 7. So while constructing like all aspects of our final product, we had to advance our knowledge in using Final Cut Pro 7 because obviously we had to ensure that our final product would look, you know, professional. So some members of our group, like myself and Soraya, we had a basic understanding of what we could do on Final Cut Pro 7. So we knew how to kind of import footage, we knew how to use the blade tools and a couple of other things, but we didn't have like the advanced knowledge that we needed to make sure that our final product looked the way that we wanted it to and looked as professional as we could get it to look. So we used like YouTube and kind of other tutorials online to advance our knowledge and learn how to do specific tasks that we felt that we needed to do to improve our final product. And for example, when we wanted to use the color corrector, we didn't really know what everything did, what the balance of colors did, so we kind of googled that and used YouTube a lot to our advantage, and we were able to kind of make those improvements. So for example, in some of our shots, like in the Beavis Estate footage, the footage was really like, there was lots of high key lighting because we filmed in the day, and so obviously the connotations of high key lighting are kind of, you know, positive and almost happy, and that's not the atmosphere that we wanted. So using the color corrector tools in Final Cut Pro 7, we were able to kind of make things look more blue so that it was a lot more kind of frosty and cold. And it allows the audience to sympathize with Mickey because he's homeless and he has nowhere to go and the weather is really cold, and we want it to kind of be visible that it was that cold. And we also used the color correction tools to darken the frames to also counteract the high key lighting that was in our raw footage, so that we didn't have like the look of the frame contrasting with the atmosphere that we were going for. We then used Final Cut Pro 10 to edit the sound of the radio that's playing over the footage in the house. We wanted the music to match the mise en scène, which is why we selected A Christmas Carol, and the song needed to be edited so that it sounds as though it's coming from an internal source like a radio. So after I recorded the song and imported it into Final Cut Pro 10, I also recorded other Foley sounds, so things like you know, just an empty room, so you have that kind of light fuzzy sound, crunching a plastic bag, a carrier bag, and a subtle breeze outside, and that made the volume really low. And when I layered those sounds over each other but made the volume obviously a lot lower than the song, it really gave that kind of fuzzy, like it's coming from an internal source and it's not live music, which is exactly what we wanted. For this task I almost used kind of trial and error to find, you know, which settings would work best, making the song sound as though it was coming from a radio. So I used the undertones, clarity and voice enhancement settings to gain the final product in Final Cut Pro 10, and I increased the sounds of the undertones so that any background noise that was already in the recording of the song would kind of be enhanced. And I reduced the clarity and I reduced the volume of the voice so that the actual song would come through a lot more, and that so that the music of the song wasn't cancelled out by the singing, because obviously you need the song to make it sound like a radio. And once we laid all of those sounds and played around with the settings in Final Cut Pro 10, we got the final kind of sound and effect that we wanted. We also made good use of Photoshop when we were making our logos. So when actually creating the logos in the beginning, I used Adobe Photoshop, and I had to design original logos for Apollo Productions and Hermes Distribution Company that we could later then use in our ident in the very beginning of our film opening. So I used the online help forum on Adobe's website to ask and find answers to any questions that I had regarding the tools on Photoshop, and I then followed the step-by-step instructions on how to complete the specific task. Things like, you know, removing the background of an image, adding colour to certain parts of an image. Also I learned a lot about kind of tools like strokes and you know, the magic wand tool, things like that, so that I could kind of get the effect and the colours that would match our colour scheme and the look that we wanted to match kind of the lettering of Apollo. Like we made use of the lyre, and we flipped it over and we changed the colour of it, and we moved the bar in the middle so that it was a bit higher, and then it looked like an A, and we can use it for the A in Apollo, so things like that. And we use that to, you know, so substitute for the lettering in the company names, and also kind of just work as the logos for the company as well. Then once we had sorted our logos and they were all finalized, we went to use Adobe After Effects, and this is what I used to make the ident. So when designing the ident, I used a software that I had no experience with, and for this I also relied on YouTube tutorials to understand the different settings on the tools. I also learned how to import images onto the canvas, which I used when adding our logos for Apollo Productions and for Hermes Distribution Company. I also learned how to add text onto the canvas and style it the way that I liked. So obviously we were trying to abide by our colour scheme, so we used kind of white font and blue font for the Apollo Productions part of the ident, and then we were making the ident for Hermes. We obviously kept to the white scheme, and then we had like the orange in the sort of the H. I experimented with different fonts, and I did try and experiment with some colours, but then obviously we just kind of abided by our colour scheme. I also learned how to make use of animations, which is what I used to add the harp style effect on the Apollo logo, and we then complemented it with the harp sound effect on top of that to kind of make our ident. Last but not least, we did also make use of a DSLR camera while filming. So many of the technology related improvements that were made were a part of the filming process rather than the editing process. So for example, each member of the group attended a DSLR workshop in which we learned how to make effective use of the DSLR cameras. We learned how to use the settings to ensure that the raw footage would look professional before we even sequenced it. To be specific, I gained a better understanding of how to set the white balance on the camera and kind of the reason behind doing so. So when comparing some of our original shots, we noticed that there were a few that looked fairly yellow at times, and then comparing that with our latest footage where we had set the white balance properly, and then we didn't have as many issues kind of color correcting our footage because we didn't have like those off-white tones or anything like that. We also learned how to kind of add certain things to the camera, so we learned how to mantle on a microphone, we learned how to mantle on a light and the softbox. We learned how to kind of add lens filters, so things like that. We did try and make good use of those, especially in our test shots. So yeah, one of our biggest improvements from kind of the start to finish was with a camera. So those were the 5 main kind of key areas where we made technology related improvements. A lot of them were on softwares just because so many of the changes we made were kind of in the editing process, but definitely kind of using a professional camera properly made a huge impact on our final piece. So learning how to use one and making sure that we took advantage of everything that the camera could do almost made a huge impact on the look of our final product.